Okay. I'm going to apologize in advance for this one because today you are going to have to hear me sing. Now, why would I subject you to such an unpleasant experience? That is because today we are diving back into our discussion of foundational music theory concepts, and included in that is a little bit of ear training today. Today's concept is one of the most foundational ones that you need to know to understand how harmony works. That is the 2-5-1 chord progression. You're going to see this all over the place in jazz standards from many different eras. It is just a foundational building block for how we manipulate harmony as improvisers. Cool, let's just dig right into things. Now we're going to start out with a little bit of sort of the academic theory side of things, and then we are going to switch to some ways that we practice this stuff. That is where I'm going to subject you to a little bit of my voice. I'm not a super confident singer. I never have been. I don't particularly enjoy singing. Now, that may be some of you. Some of you might be like, Sean, I love to sing. And so if you are somebody who hates singing or whether you're somebody who loves singing, all this stuff is going to benefit you, not only as an improviser, but if you are a brass player watching this, singing is one of the best things you can do for your overall brass playing. So if you don't like singing, in all honesty, you just kind of have to get over it because it helps you so much. So that's the only thing I'm going to say about it. We'll check that out a little bit later in this lesson. So let's get into understanding these 2-5-1 chord progressions. The first thing we want to check out is actually identifying what a 2-5-1 is and where we can find them in our music. This is the first step you got to take. Now, broadly speaking, you might remember to our last lesson where we talked about diatonic harmony, how we could assign a Roman numeral number to each one of our chords that is created within a diatonic scale. So when we're creating a 2-5-1 chord progression, we are using the chord that is based on the second note of the scale, then the chord is based on the fifth note of the scale, and then it resolves to the chord that is based on the first note of the scale. That is the most straightforward way you'll see them. You will see a few variations, which we'll talk about a couple of them, but that is what makes it 2-5. How do we recognize these in the songs we play though? Because they're actually not always that clear cut. So let's check it out. The first thing we want to do is think about our circle of fifths, little scale diagram that we might use like back when we're in like middle school or high school to help us learn our scales. Now, as you probably know, we start at the top with C, no flats or sharps. As we go around the circle counterclockwise, we are going to add flats. As we go around the circle clockwise, we are going to add sharps. What we want to worry about is if we see a chord progression where the roots are moving in that counterclockwise motion, C to F to B flat to E flat, so on and so forth. It is very likely somewhere in there is a 2-5-1 progression. Now, if we just look at the roots for, say, the first four of them, C, F, B flat, E flat, there really is not a good way without knowing the melody, without knowing a little more context about how to actually determine where the 2-5-1 is, because we don't know anything about these chords' function, and that's what we're really trying to get at. So we actually need to know sort of a context they appear in. So let's add some chord qualities to this and see if that can give us some clues about where the 2-5-1 actually appears. Now we have a C minor 7 to an F dominant 7 to a B flat major 7 to an E flat major 7. For me, what I really like to do to identify where these 2-5-1s might potentially be, and especially for students who are just getting started on this, is looking for those dominant chords. So in this case, that is the F7 chord. Now, if you know your diatonic chords, and especially those diatonic 7 chords, you will know that dominant chords are built off of the fifth note of the scale. So we know that that's a dominant chord. If we make that the fifth of a given key area, we can look forward to see if the next key could be a 1, or if the chord before it could be a 2. So in our case, we have a B flat chord if we go forward. So we will have an F to a B flat. Those two chords live in the same key. F is the fifth of B flat, and that would make B flat the 1. So that's a very good indication that we probably have a 2-5-1. And then if we go back one chord to the C minor 7, C is the 2 chord of B flat. So we do in fact have our 2-5-1 in the key of B flat, and then our E flat chord at the end, we would think that that is the fourth note of the scale if we think this whole 4 bars is sort of a B flat key center. One area that I often find students getting this stuff together get into problems, they always just look for the end of the phrase to being sort of the 1 chord. So if we momentarily thought, okay, well, E flat is the 1 chord, that means B flat could be 5 of E flat, F could be 2 of E flat, that would make C the 6th note of E flat, and so we could have a 6, 2, 5, 1. That would be cool, but the chord functions are all out of whack now. That B flat chord is a major 7 chord, the 2 chord is now dominant, and some of these variations do happen, but remember, the most common one is to see that pattern of a minor chord going to a dominant chord, going to a resolution chord. That is the key thing, especially in sort of a straightforward way of finding these 2-5-1s. minor to dominant to resolution, which is oftentimes one, oftentimes a major chord, or if the whole tune was in minor, it might be a minor chord. That's not going to work in every single situation, but it will definitely get you started and work in many situations. All right, just jumping in here with one little quick point of order. When I originally recorded this, the next section I covered a few of the common variations on the types of 2-5-1s you will see when you're playing. However, when I went to edit it, I realized it was a little bit confusing and just sort of long-winded and didn't really add anything to the lesson. So I ended up cutting that out. However, I did introduce the tune that we are looking at this week, which is the standard Autumn Leaves. We are looking at it in B-flat major or G minor, however you like to think about it. I sort of like in the next section allude to that. I already introduced to it, so I just wanted to make sure we're all clear on what's going on. That has two 2-5s in it. It has a 2-5-1 to B flat major and a 2-5-1 to G minor. It will make sense in the next section you'll see, but I just wanted to make sure it was clear because it is going to seem like maybe a little bit of a jump. All right, that's all the theory stuff. Let's talk about actually practicing these. So this is where singing is going to come in, unfortunately for me. As I said, I'm not a super confident singer, so I'm going to do the best I can on some of these examples. There's a few things that we want to do with this singing. The first, and really the only thing we're going to talk about today, is just being able to sing the roots of the chords. If we look at the A sections for our tune Autumn Leaves, we can see we have two chunks of 2-5s, basically the ones we just talked about. We have a 2-5-1 to B flat, and then we have a 2-5-1 to G minor. So we want to be able to sing the root movement of these, not worrying about chord quality, not worrying about any of that stuff. It's all about singing the roots. I know for me, when I practice in this way, I'm really worried about listening to the bass player and trying to connect with like, where are those bass lines going and can I hear where the next chord is going, rather than necessarily thinking about intervals. Like when I sing from a C up to an F that I'm singing a fourth up, you could totally do that if that's your preferred approach. I don't tend to like that, so I really like to listen to the bass player. That's really ultimately what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to train my ears to hear where the bass player is going, maybe a little bit where the piano player is, so that when I'm in a real improvisational situation, I can hear them and hopefully have an idea what they're doing. Or maybe if I'm transcribing a tune and want to learn the chord changes, I can hopefully pick out those movements. So to start with, you might just want to play this on your horn. We're going to use a little bit of rhythm on it just to make it feel a little bit more like a swinging exercise. That is a very standard, typical sort of exercise, especially if you're learning a new tune, just to play the roots through the changes so you can kind of know where stuff is. Let's move this to our voice, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to use the exact same rhythm. I'm going to do the best I can to sing in tune, but I'm really trying to listen for where that root movement is. Do-dot-dot, 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 do-dot-dot. As I said at the beginning of the lesson, if you are a more confident singer, that's probably going to feel pretty easy in all honesty. But if you're somebody like me who does not have a lot of experience singing, has zero training singing, and has never been a very confident singer, that might be hard. I didn't get serious about this until I was in my early 30s. I was tired of being so bad at it, so I just started practicing it. And I still don't think I'm a very good singer, and I still struggle a lot in this way. But I'm immensely better than I used to be, and it has had huge impacts on my playing. So I cannot overstate how important it is to both sing from an improvisational standpoint and, as I said, from a brass playing standpoint. Try it for 2 weeks, and I bet you'll notice a big difference. It's going to be hard at first if you're not a very good singer, but give it a go. It will really pay good dividends in your playing. Cool, now that I've subjected you enough of listening to my voice as a vocalist, let's talk about the other exercise we might want to do with these 2-5-1s. This is a classic. This is doing thirds and sevenths through these changes. This is one I don't think we've ever delved into on the channel before, but really, really important one to have under your fingers. What we're going to do is we're literally just going to play the third and seventh of every chord. The reason we do this is it creates some nice voice leading through these changes. So let's break it down and then we'll hear it in an exercise. So when we have these chords functioning in sort of these typical ways like a 2-5-1, the thirds and sevenths are going to dictate the voice leading. They're going to create this nice little through line through the chord changes that is going to be inherently melodic as it uses half steps and whole steps to resolve from one chord to the next. And knowing the thirds and sevenths is going to allow us to access this little melodic line. If we look at an example of this, you got to take some time to be able to spell this stuff. I would encourage you, if it's difficult, to write it out like a little etude for yourself. But if you feel like you have good command over this, you could just skip that step and just go right to playing it. In my first measure, my third is E flat, my seventh is B flat, and then I'm going to resolve to my third of the next bar, it's an F7 chord, my third is an A, my seventh is an E flat. Third of the next bar is B flat, so the third is D, and so on and so forth through the changes. Now, whether you go down or up from the third to the seventh doesn't really matter. So for example, this first 4 bars of Autumn Leaves, you could play it a couple different ways. It'd all be good as long as you are starting on the third and going to the seventh in each bar. As you're going through this exercise, what I really want you to pay attention for, both from a theory standpoint and especially from a listening standpoint, is checking out where the half step or whole step resolutions take place. It's always going to be from the end of one bar, the seventh, resolving to the third of the next bar. So if we're going from C minor 7 to F dominant 7, the B flat from the C chord resolves to the A of the F chord. That's a half step. The E flat from the F chord resolves to the D natural, of the B flat chord. That's a half step. There are some whole steps in some other places if you continue on through this phrase, or if you go to the second phrase from the A minor 7/5, going G to F sharp for that to the D chord, there's your half step. But then we go from the D chord to the G minor chord. Now that it's a minor chord, there's going to be a whole step resolution from the C to the B flat. So it's all about knowing where these are academically, also from an ear standpoint. Hopefully they can inform your ear. So we put this all together. If we play through an A section, it ends up sounding like this. Cool. Now, the trick with this stuff is to move it into a more musical context. If you just practice that, you're going to say, Sean, well, that's great, and I guess I understand harmony, but I don't sound any better. I don't sound like I'm playing bebop. I don't sound like I'm playing Charlie Parker. You know, this is where really an exercise like this has its limitations if you don't take it to the next step. So the next step with this is to start thinking in terms of how can I make little melodies out of this, adding some extra notes from either the chord or from the mode, or if it was me, I would actually think of the key center. Even putting that into a musical context, it still sounds a little bit exercisey. If I was actually going to think this way, I would give myself a little more freedom to sort of be like, all right, well, maybe I'll think about some thirds and sevenths, but then as soon as my ears sort of wanted to venture in a different direction, I would probably go there, maybe come back to those thirds and sevenths. It's all about having that as a foundational item that's sort of underpinning the other things you do, not necessarily as something that's going to constrict you and bind you into playing a certain way. So that's what we got for the kind of foundations of 2-5-1s. Make sure you have a good understanding of how to find these, thinking about function of chords. If you're not thinking about function of chords, that's a key area you gotta check out. And then from there, go to trying to use your voice a little bit, these thirds and sevenths. That would be a great thing to sing as well, especially if you're feeling like singing roots is really good. These would be a great next step to go singing-wise, something I could probably stand to revisit myself. And then from there, just check out the thirds and seventh thing and see if you can do something with it. It's really the foundation of understanding good voice leading. Cool. We'll see you in the woodshed.